Whether you call it Kveik, Kvik, or Kvike, there's no denying that this unique Norwegian yeast has had a remarkable impact on the brewing scene, and Imperial Yeast's A43 Loki is one of the best versions out there. With the ability to produce a clean beer when fermented as warm as 104 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 degrees Celsius, you heard that right, while also performing well at more standard ale temperatures, Imperial Yeast A43 Loki is as versatile as it gets, meaning you have zero excuses for failing to brew throughout the year. Learn more about A43 Loki at imperialyeast.com and grab a pouch for your next batch to see what all the fuss is about. Often disregarded by self-appointed beer aficionados as being flavorless swill intended to help college kids in trailer trash get drunk easily at a low cost, it may surprise some to learn that American Light Lager is one of the most popular beer styles in the world based on overall consumption. What makes this all the more interesting to me, at least, is the fact American Light Lager is widely believed to be rather difficult to brew. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me on this episode to discuss the style that so many love to hate is contributor Alex Shanks-Abel.
Yeah, we Americans have this reputation, probably earned, frankly, for making everything bigger and more extreme. You know, we weren't satisfied with already big English styles like barley wine, stout, porter. We had to add more hops, more malt, more alcohol, more attenuation. But despite this, light lager feels like the quintessential American beer. And yet, I can't think of a style that gets more hate, except for maybe pastry stout.
Well, look, I love craft beer. I mean, a quick glance at my credit card statement on a monthly basis will prove that. In fact, I just picked up my second 12-pack of this year's Celebration Ale from Sierra Nevada, which, by the way, is incredible. But I don't view that as restricting me from enjoying certain styles. I get that some people are hung up on the whole big beer thing, and they have like philosophical qualms with that. I don't really have an issue with it. So to each their own. But in the 2+ decades that I've been in beer, in brewing altogether, I've come across quite a few people who it's obvious only seem to hate American Light Lager because it's the trendy thing to do. It's like, oh, look at me, I hate this because I brew my own beer and I drink craft beer or whatever it is. So either way, I love it, and I look forward to chatting about it with you today, Alex, as well as what tasters thought of one brewed short and shoddy style. All right, if you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for your support, consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, where you make a small monthly pledge to receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. The guest for this month, November of 2024, is assistant professor in food chemistry at the University of Arkansas, Dr. Scott LaFontaine. If you've been listening to the Brew Lab podcast, this name may be familiar to you, as Dr. LaFontaine has been interviewed a few times, touching on topics like brewing with rice and how on-bind maturity affects cascade hop aroma. Suffice to say, Scott is a trove of brewing knowledge, and we are very excited our patrons have the opportunity to pick his brain. He's going to be hanging out with patrons on Saturday, November 23rd, 2024. That's about 5 days after the release of this episode, so make sure to make your pledge of just $3 or more by Friday the 22nd. All past sessions are stored on our private Patreon and Facebook pages, so you can go back and watch them whenever you like. Learn more about all of the rewards we offer for your support and become a patron today over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. We would not be here today if it weren't for Patreon. So, any support you're willing to throw our way through that channel, we really do appreciate it. And if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, we'd appreciate that as well. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who, in addition to having an awesome YouTube channel chock full of great brewing-related content, sell what we believe to be some of the best electric brewing systems on the market. If you've been considering making the move from propane to electric, you owe it to yourself to check out Clawhammer Supply. Whether you're after a 120-volt 5-gallon unit or something bigger like their powerful 240-volt 10-gallon system, Clawhammer has got you covered. Learn more about everything they have to offer over at clawhammersupply.com, and don't forget to check out their YouTube channel as well. So this week's feedback comes from a listener who asked that they remain anonymous. Ooh, boy. Let's see what they've got to say here. This person said, I've been brewing for about 13 years and started entering competitions about a year and a half ago, just to see that textbook, quote, unbiased feedback. And it's been a fun time. I never plotted a brew schedule specifically for competing. I just counter pressure fill bottles with beers that fall within style parameters and I happen to have on tap during shipping windows, or if I need to make room for more beer. I've managed to pick up some bronze and silver medals in a handful of different local and regional competitions, and I snagged a gold at a local competition in my state. In one particular competition, I struck out completely on 3 beers with scores in the 20s, yet the same beers scored 40 plus points in other competitions, earning medals. I received gold medals in both the 2023 and 2024 NHC, and that's the National Homebrew Competition, and the beers couldn't be further in style from each other. They're very different in terms of SRM and ABV. While super proud, I couldn't help but giggle and roll my eyes over the score sheets. I still think in both cases my dumb luck played a part, but the points from the score sheets versus the comments did not add up. The beer I got a gold with in 2023 scored 33 points, with all of the notes being very positive. Were the others that made it to final round really that bad? Was mine the least worst? Works for me. The beer I won gold with this year scored 44 points, with fermentation and process-based off flavors noted by the judges, complete with recommendations on how to improve the recipe. One judge noted the long-lasting head clung to the glass, while another said there was little to no head that dropped immediately. Did this, quote, off-flavor-laden beer that needed recipe and process tweaks really miss the mark that much? Well, it works for me. I know there are a lot of moving pieces in running competitions, and I appreciate the time and energy of those that contribute. While I can't make heads or tails of the score sheets, that won't stop me from entering future competitions. To those that are new to brewing and competing, feedback can be helpful. Rebrewing recipes with minor tweaks can be very helpful in understanding ingredients, but keep in mind that subjectivity exists, and more specific interstyle balances are subjective too. Think about amber ale, he says, or they say. If you have a recipe that hits all the notes you are looking for, you can send it to a competition, but make sure you have some to enjoy for yourself. What do you think about that, Alex?
Yeah, I think I might be a little bit on your side if I'm remembering things correctly about not really loving the competition side of things, partially because of what this person's talking about. You really are rolling the dice when you're submitting beers into competitions. We've got our Brew Club Discord with a specific channel dedicated to competitions, and that's always popping off with people being like, hey, what's going on? I got like an 18 in this competition and a 45 in this one. Is something wrong with my packaging? Which very well could be the case, but it's hard not to discount just both the subjectivity of preference and maybe storage conditions of competitions, or maybe just, luck.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like our anonymous, feedback submitter recognizes that there is an element of luck as well. But, I think I've made my views on competitions, and perhaps more specifically, the argument that judging is objective, pretty clear over the years. Suffice to say, I don't disagree with this listener. In fact, I've experienced similar things a few years ago. I probably talked about this on the show before, but a few years ago, a Vienna lager that I entered in NHC advanced to the final round with a score of 43 points, only to score 21 points during the final round. And it had no comments about contamination. So, I've also judged competitions where I've witnessed subjectivity at play. And I'm telling you right now, every judge who judges competitions has seen this, whether they want to call it that or not. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but I do think that those people who spend their money to enter these competitions ought to at least understand that the results are heavily influenced by the specific people doing the judging. And I mean, you could have one judging pair judge a beer, and beer from that same exact bottle can be judged by another judging pair. And I would almost guarantee the notes are going to be different. The score will likely be different. I mean, that's just the way these are. So hard as we might try to make judging objective and to convince brewers that the feedback they got on score sheets is in some way better than what they'd get from their friends, that's just not how it works, at least in my opinion. I could go on forever about this, obviously, so I'll cut myself off there. But I really do think that we need to be more, I think it shouldn't be bad to talk about judging and competing as being more subjective than it has been spun to be so far. And that's my opinion. I think we could make it more fun by doing it that way, but there's this weird drive for people want to seemingly want to, make this subjective thing more objective than it is. And I don't get it. So anyways, thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Mr. Anonymous. I thought it was quite interesting. If you have show feedback, you could send it to feedback@brulosophy.com or drop us a line on social media. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@thebrulosophy show, where Martin is pumping out awesome brewing and beer related content. We've got some fun stuff planned for 2025 for the future. So if you enjoy listening to this podcast, my guess is that you're going to love watching the Brulosophy show as well. When we return from this break, our focus will be on American Light Lager. Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Exchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brulosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Exchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Exchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to exchillerator.com today. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today.
Got great ideas, but no idea how to build a website? Get Bluehost. Their AI design tool creates high-quality WordPress sites super fast. Whether you're a blogger, influencer, or launching a side hustle, Bluehost helps boost your growth with built-in marketing and e-commerce tools. Upgrade to cloud and get 100% uptime and 24/7 security to stay online all the time. Why wait? You've got the vision. Make it real. Visit Bluehost.com to get started.
The AI upscaling on the new Samsung Neo QLED and OLED TVs brings old content like from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond into the future.
So no matter how far back your shows are from, it'll look groovy, baby. It instantly soups up whatever you're watching to super high quality, you dig?
And no matter how fast your sports are booking it, it won't look bogus with lag or blur. We're talking popping color and contrast on a glare-free OLED, so your OG content looks fly, day or night. And these processors on the Neo QLED 8K are awesome sauce. They upscale every detail you're watching to look super sweet.
Bro, are you pumped to see what happens when all your content
Gets brought into the future? Uh-oh, maybe that's too far into the future. Yeah, that's better. Welcome to a new era of Samsung AI TV. Discover more at Samsung.com. Upscale every moment. Upscaling utilizes AI-based algorithms. Viewing experience may vary according to types of content and format.
These days, American Light Lager doesn't receive much attention, at least by those in craft beer circles, and that's likely a function of its ubiquity. I mean, it's everywhere. I have had fresh, icy pints of beers like Miller Lite and Coors Light everywhere from Riga, Latvia to Dublin, Ireland and Costa Rica. Despite this lack of attention, though, it is massively popular. And interestingly, to me at least, it's actually a relatively new style based on what I could find online and what I've read. By the mid 20th century or so, pale lager reigned supreme and was widely available to consumers in the United States. We know that. But it was only in 1967 that Rheingold Brewery out of Brooklyn, New York, developed this pale lager that was lower in both strength and calories than standard American lager of the time. And their whole thing was to market it to these diet conscious consumers, which cracks me up. I mean, if there's a thing that people enjoy, there will be a company that decides to market it to people who are trying to watch their, health, I guess. Anyways, it didn't really gain much traction until the early 1970s when Miller Brewing acquired Rheingold's recipe and began targeting sports fans rather than those concerned about their waistlines. Does anybody, Alex, how about you? Do you recall the original tagline for Miller Lite?
Tastes great.
Less filling.
Tastes great.
Yeah, I remember that from the 80s and the 90s as well. It was so common. And one could argue that the popularity of light lagers today is a testament to how well their marketing worked. And I mean, I think it worked well. The fact we still remember that, Alex, and they're still doing it. Spend 10 minutes watching any sports game on TV, and you're going to undoubtedly see a commercial for one of the big three commercial producers of American Light Lager. For those of you who watched that embarrassment of a fight between Mike Tyson and Jake Paul, like I did, there were Miller Lite, big old, marketing Miller Lite cans right up in the corner almost the entire fight. So it's everywhere these days.
And yet they won't sponsor Brulosophy. Shame.
I don't even know who to reach out to. It'd be so cheap for them to do that. I know. We give them enough love as it is. At the very least, they could give me a free 36 pack a month or something. But
Right.
I think it's pretty obvious though that this style was hugely inspired by standard American lager. So it has a lot of the same characteristics, just with less of pretty much everything. The latest edition of the BJCP guidelines describes American Light Lager as a highly carbonated, very light-bodied, nearly flavorless lager designed to be consumed very cold. It's very refreshing and thirst-quenching. You have any thoughts on that description, Alex?
I'll try not to go on too much of a rant, but I do have like a little bit of a weird beef with people calling lagers in general clean and light lagers flavorless. I can't help but wonder if a lot of these comments simply come from the fact that American lagers are just so ubiquitous that they're seen as the default. It's like how many people outside of the United States will describe Hershey's chocolate as having this like tangy, acidic flavor, even though people here will talk about it just being this super plain chocolate. Which, part of the reason I bring this up is because I didn't really drink any beer until I started homebrewing. My parents didn't really drink either. And so to me, something like the Chico strain is kind of more of what I'll think of as a very clean yeast. Yet when I taste something like an American light lager, there are flavors there that I feel like are absent in, ales. So, I wouldn't be so quick to dismiss light lagers as being flavorless.
Yeah, I certainly don't think they're flavorless. Flavorless to me would be water, and I know a lot of people love to make the comparison of American Light Lager to either water or urine, which doesn't make any sense to me either. So again, to me, it's just a style people love to hate, and the fact that it seems that sentiment is softening a little bit, I'm kind of happy for that. So let's break down this style by the four main things that we're looking at when it comes to beer.
Yeah, I think something that stands out the most when you look at this beer is the color itself. You're going to see pretty much just the same color no matter which one you pour. Last night, before we record this podcast for homework, I drank 7 different light lagers. And
Of course you did.
Right. And pretty much every single one of them had the same, very pale straw color and just absolutely brilliantly clear.
Yeah.
Which I think is pretty interesting. I don't think most people are drinking these from a pint glass and hyper analyzing the appearance of it, but I still appreciate the massive effort that goes into this presentation.
Oh, without a doubt, man. I went to a birthday party last night and they had a keg, or not a keg, an ice chest full of Coors Light, which I drink very rarely these days. And I'm telling you, I mean, it tastes, in my opinion, massively different than Miller Lite, which in and of itself is proof that it's not flavorless, but crystal clear, nice white head that's a little bit more loose than a denser, like the Celebration Ale has this dense rocky head. But yeah, I'm a fan, like I said before. Now in terms of aroma, you're looking for, low malt aroma, which it's optional. You might perceive like a grainy, sweet or corn-like thing. To me, the reason I love Miller Lite is I do get this grainy thing. And I wonder if they're still using Rheingold's original recipe, because there's something special to me about Miller Lite with that grainy thing that I don't get in, say, Coors Light, which has a kind of a nondescript sweetness to it. And then Bud Light has this very distinct, It's light, but I get it. Kind of apple-y thing that I'm not a huge fan of. That's my least favorite of the big three. Light, spicy, floral, or herbal hop aroma is optional. Again, there's really not supposed to be much in the way of hop flavor or malt aroma in these beers. And then obviously a clean fermentation profile is desirable, but a light amount of yeast character is not a fault, the BJCP says.
Yeah, and that yeast character can get a little bit muddy too, since plenty of these examples are served in glass bottles that sit on a shelf for 2 years before they're consumed. So they can, it's hard to know if a slight sulfur note is the yeast or a very subtle light struck character.
Yeah, right. And it's interesting because, you know, anybody who drinks green bottle beers like Heineken or Beck's or anything like that, again, I love that stuff when it's not totally light struck. Or even clear bottle beers like Corona, we know that light struck character. Oddly enough, I can't recall ever having an American light lager, let's just say Miller Lite, that had that skunk aroma out of the bottle. But I have definitely poured a glass, you know, of Miller Lite or ordered a glass, and I'm sitting outside in the sun, and within seconds that skunk aroma is there. So it's certainly possible.
Yeah, like last night when I was doing my tasting, one of the beers that was in a bottle was a Michelob Ultra, and yeah, that had a skunkiness that you could smell from 5 feet away, and unsurprisingly, everything in the cans was totally clean on that front.
Yeah, I hate Michelob Ultra. I've had probably 5 cans of it. The first time I had it, I ran a half marathon and they were giving it out at the end of the marathon. I guess that's common. Beer is like a good replenishment, I guess, for runners, whatever. And even then, as miserable as I felt after running 13 plus miles, that beer made me want to puke. I thought it tasted so bad. And the reason I bring that up is because the fact Miller Lite is basically the same calories and carbs and all that stuff. I don't know why anybody wouldn't just drink that over Michelob Ultra, but hey, again, subjectivity of preference. So the flavor is going to follow the aroma more or less. A very low grainy or corn-like flavor that can be perceived as sweet due to the low bitterness in this style of beer. Again, low floral, spicy, or herbal hop flavor is optional, but it's rarely strong enough to detect. And then you're aiming for low to very low bitterness. This beer is supposed to, remember the whole Keystone commercial, the bitter beer face commercial? The idea
I'm a
behind...
little young for that one.
Oh, you don't remember? Oh, you got to have to Google or YouTube it. It's pretty funny when they got a dude on there who can make that real bitter looking face. But yeah, the idea is that it's easy drinking, right? And so you don't want it to be too sharply bitter or aggressive on that front. And also just that clean fermentation profile following through from the aroma.
Yeah. And, following through on flavor, we're hopping into mouthfeel, which is described here as having a very light body, bordering on watery. Which yeah, I don't feel like is too off the mark. There are a few examples out there that taste like a hard seltzer with a little sprinkling of corn in there. Not a bad thing, by the way.
No, man, I agree.
And perhaps most importantly, these things have an extremely high carbonation that can be high enough to even have a little bit of that carbonic bite to them. I wonder if that's part of the reason that the bitterness in these beers is so low. I feel like that can kind of counteract some of that grainy sweetness of the malt.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, on that front, the thing about American Light Lager, and is for as much hate as it gets, is that it's a surprisingly well balanced style. I mean, it's intended to be that, so that more people who may not like, you know, beer in general are still find it approachable.
Yeah, and even with that that balanced finish is super dry. I mean, not too many people are planning on having just one, so it's perfect that this beer washes off and you're ready for a next one a minute later.
Amen to that. The vital stats that BJCP provides, and again, you know, these are settled on by, you know, a few people at the Beer Judge certification program. It's not like these are hard and fast rules, but I do think they're good for guidelines. 1028 to 1040 OG, finishing at 0.998. That's hella dry. To 1008 FG, which results in a beer with a alcohol by volume of 2.8 to 4.2%. You're looking for anywhere between 8 and 12 IBU, so not very bitter at all, and then about 2 to 3 SRM. I mean, this is the lightest style of beer out there. I mean, I think I've maybe made a Berliner Weiss that was like a 1.5 in the end or a 2 SRM. But other than that, American Light Lager is going to be very, very pale.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a very short list of things that are going to be have less alcohol than this even, like maybe dark mild. Yeah, maybe Berliner Weiss.
Yeah.
I'm curious what a beer on there goes down to $9.98.
That's not a sour beer, I know.
Right, yeah. Must be 100% corn. But yeah, so moving on to the malts, the grains, very standard is a 2 or 6 row barley malt, which I mean, I feel like that covers every barley strain, but yeah, I get what they're getting at.
It is like, you know, we've done experiments comparing 2 and 6 row barley malt, and they do seem to be different. I've never actually brewed with 6 row, but I think in American brewing, 6 row malt became very commonly associated with big beer, with these light lagers or American lagers that were produced by Bud Miller and Coors. But of course, they're using a pretty hefty dose of adjunct grains as well, typically either rice or corn. And that is now an expected part of these styles of beers. It can be kind of difficult actually to get the qualities that we just discussed without using an adjunct like this, because that is responsible for it boosting that ABV without using so much grain, because they're about 100% fermentable compared to grain, which, you know, is less fermentable than that. So pretty much any Pilsner malt's going to work for you. I've actually made an American light lager with I forget what it's called. It's Great Western though made a pale malt that they called Northwest Pale Ale Malt or something like that. Apparently it was their version of like Maris Otter. To me, it tasted nothing like Maris Otter, but I used that for an American light lager with about 35-40% flaked maize, and it turned out excellent. So a lot of options there as long as you're going with a neutral base malt.
Yeah. And possibly you might want to look out for some Pilsner malts. I've tried using, I think it's RAR that makes North Star Pils in the past. And, that thing is nearly colorless, just as colorless as corn, and might even get you under 2 SRM when you use it.
Yeah.
And of course, with Pilsner malt, I think in the guidelines it specifically calls out 2 row and 6 row. So technically, I think Pilsner malt might get you outside the guidelines.
Well, Pilsner malt is made from typically made with 2 row malt as well. It's just how they kiln it and how they treat it. So again, you're just going for the lightest malt you can get your hands on, and maybe a certain. I'm not a big fan of Weirmann's Barca malt, and I know a lot of people love it. To me, I get this white grape skin, like this whisper of white grape skin when I use it, and I'm just not a huge fan of it. It's good, and I've had excellent beers made with it. But you're going to pick the lightest malt you can. In terms of hops, you can use whatever hops you want because you're not using enough to really, or you're not using it in a manner that's going to allow that hop character to go through. So don't waste good hops on this. I mean, I'm not trying to talk bad about Cluster, Mount Hood, Hallertau, stuff like that. You want stuff that's going to get you bitterness without contributing too much flavor. And in my opinion, this style really benefits from a lower alpha acid hop because you're using enough that some of that aroma and flavor does carry through to the end product, as opposed to say, 5 grams of a super high alpha hop versus, an ounce or 28 grams of, say, Mount Hood or something. One of my favorite, again, the same one that I was talking about earlier that I used that pale ale malt on, I used all Mount Hood, and it was just a 60-minute edition or maybe a first wort hop edition, and it came out so tasty. So yeah, that's that. You're primarily using the hops though for bitterness, not so much flavor or aroma, and the goal there is just to balance that malt sweetness.
Yeah, so maybe be on the lookout if you're planning on ordering some German hops, because recent crop years are down to 1.4% alpha acid for Hersbrucker, and something like that. You might be tossing in 2 or 3 ounces into a light lager like this, and could potentially make it a little too flavorful. I would be fine with it, but may not be competition worthy.
I love that the risk that you run is making it too flavorful, but that's the way this style's designed. And it's going to be the same comments that we have for your yeast choice. You just want to go with a clean lager yeast. It can be any type of lager yeast, in my opinion. Popularly used for this style at least by my friends who homebrew them. is the Weihenstephan strain. That's Imperial Yeast L13 Global, WLP 830 German Lager, and then Y Yeast 2124 Bohemian. It's also the 3470 from Saf Lager, or now it's, I believe, Fermentus is the lab. And then another one that I really like for this style is Imperial Yeast L17 Harvest, which is the Augustiner strain. I believe White Labs sells it as WLP 860 Munich Lager, and Y Yeast sells it as 2352 Munich 2. What I love about that yeast, and I'm sure I've commented on this before, is that there's something about it that contributes this. Well, let me put it this way. When I smell it, I get this nostalgic reminder of my childhood, and my stepdad drank the classic slanted bottle Michelob back then. And so I get that aroma from it that I absolutely love. So for me, that's my go-to. Are there other yeast that you would suggest using for this style?
Yeah, frankly, no notes from me. I would personally just say that if you want something that's kind of on the cleaner end, like maybe like a Coors Light or Natty, I would lean kind of Weihenstephan. And if you want something, quote unquote, a little bit more flavor to it, like a Miller Lite or a Michelob, I would lean in the L17 direction.
Yeah, there's also WLP 840. I don't know if other labs produce it. It's said to be sourced from Anheuser-Busch and used for Budweiser and Bud Light. I've had beers made with that strain, and I do get that kind of distinct appley character. It's not strong. It doesn't taste like apple cider or anything. So it's not a yeast that I'm a huge fan of, but that is a function of fermentation. So if that's what you're going for, if your preference is for like Bud Light, then that's another strain you might want to consider. So let's get into the kind of the traditional way of brewing an American light lager. I do think we should offer a little bit of a disclaimer that neither of us have ever worked for Bud Miller or Coors. As far as I know, Alex, you haven't. So we haven't brewed.
No comment. Yeah.
No comment. Yeah. We haven't brewed these like on a professional scale, and the craft beer brewing friends that I have, when they make American light lager, they're doing basically what homebrewers are doing and trying to piece together, a style or a beer based on what we know about the style. So what we have to say about the process isn't going to be terribly detailed, I don't think. I will say that there are certain aspects to American light lager that we know are going to be affected by the brewing process, and that at least for me, in my approach to brewing this style, that's what I focused on more than how the big beer brewers are doing it. So that's going to be kind of the take we're going at. We're going to start with water chemistry. In my opinion, you don't need to go crazy on, chloride or sulfate. A balanced ratio is probably going to work for this. I go just slightly higher sulfate because that's what I do for all of my lager, because to me, it increases that perception of crispness, and it will also help to bring some of that hop bitterness out. And I like that because it makes it more drinkable for me. Again, we're not talking about extremes here. Maybe like 1.5 to 1 sulfate to chloride type of deal. That's my preference. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have a similar thought about just trying to keep those as low as possible. I probably veer away from you a little bit. I steal some notes from sour brewers who like to lean a little more in the chloride direction to give it a little bit more of a softer mouthfeel to counteract that high carbonation. But yeah, I mean, it's tiny amounts. I do something like 20 ppm of chloride to 15 sulfate,
Yeah.
Tiny amounts.
Right. And in terms of the mash, I mean, I don't know if Bud Miller Coors relies on convoluted mashing processes. My hunch is that they're using single infusion mashes. If not, if you're brewing one of these yourself, you might consider a step mash if you're using, say, 6-row. That's something that I've heard can really help to encourage just complete conversion of those starches into fermentable sugars. We know it works with 2-row malt. So for me, again, my approach has always been single infusion. Also, you might bring up, decoction. This is not a Pilsner. You're not looking, first off, the jury's out on whether or not decoction actually contributes flavor. I don't believe it does, and that's based on data, not opinion. I've also not tasted a decocted beer that I felt had melanoid and content from the decoction. So that aside, you wouldn't want to use something that is intended to contribute that kind of flavor to a style that's not supposed to have that much flavor in it. So that's why we're not going to focus on that. For me, single infusion, 60 to 90 minutes at about 148 to 152 Fahrenheit or 65 to 67 C. You really just want to go low so that that beta amylase is activated and ferments those or chops those starches down into smaller sugars that are easy for the yeast to ferment, and so you result in a nice dry beer.
Yeah, when it comes to a lot of this stuff that we're talking about, like step mash versus single infusion, I would definitely just kind of go with your gut or whatever you're more comfortable with, because it's not like Bud Miller Coors are printing their recipe sheets on the back of the can behind the can art. So
wouldn't that be something, man?
Would appreciate it.
Yeah, it would be really fun. I can't wait, by the way, for the brew club to do average brew American light lager. That's just going to be so fun.
Yeah, I pitch that every single time, add it to the survey, and for some reason we only get one vote for it every quarter.
And it's yours? It's your vote.
Well, yeah.
In terms of the boil, again, this is like any other pale lager, 60 to 90 minutes based on the type of malt you're using. And the main reason for that is to isomerize alpha acids from the hops so that you have that nice balanced bitterness, as well as to reduce the risk of DMS making its way into the beer. In my opinion, at least, you want any corniness to come from the ingredients and not from dimethyl sulfide, which to me tastes more like ketchup than it does corn. So this is especially important if you are using a really lightly kilned malt like a Pilsner malt.
Right, yeah. Unless you happen to be in the camp of people who, say, really like Rolling Rock, I would encourage you to play it a little safe. Boil it for 60, 90 minutes for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not entirely convinced that driving off DMS, the only way to do that is through an extended boil. We haven't been able to replicate or to create a beer with noticeable amounts of DMS, regardless of how long we boil them, or if we boil with the lid on, nothing like that. So, but it's out there. We've definitely tasted Rolling Rock, and that definitely has a DMS-like corny character to it. So when the boil's done, you're going to quickly chill the wort to ensure a good cold break, and then rack as little trub to the fermentation vessel as possible before pitching your yeast. You want to ferment this style anywhere between 46 and 52 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 8 to 11 C. The goal there being to suppress the development of any esters. You don't want any phenols in this. You just want to encourage this nice, clean fermentation profile so that to keep the beer as flavorless as possible. That's the goal. So
yeah, I think in this section I'm supposed to say that you're supposed to ferment it cold, but I mean, yeah, I always ferment these things pretty dang warm.
Oh, we'll get to that in a minute.
Right, yeah, but definitely ferment it cold. Don't ferment it warm.
Yeah, no blaspheming in the beer world here. So once the fermentation is complete, this beer should be clear. I'm surprised that the BJCP doesn't list brilliant clarity like they do for some styles. They just put that it should be clear. This is traditionally achieved through extended lagering. Again, I have no idea how BMC lagers their beers, but we do know that they do filtration. They're using likely mechanical filtration. If you're going to lager it, you're probably looking anywhere between 3 and 10 weeks. Just in my opinion, it's done when it's clear. I know some people have this belief that magic happens when you age lagers cold for a while. So do that if you want to. But my hunch is that, again, being American light lager, when Bud Miller Coors gets done fermenting, I'm assuming they're cold filtering. I believe that's a thing that Coors Light uses in their marketing, which just means the beer is probably cold when it's pushed through a mechanical filtration system. So that's going to strip it of any yeast or particulates that are going to result in a hazy beer. So you have this nice, clean, clear beer. And then you're going to carbonate the hell out of it. 2.8 to 2.9 volumes of CO2, in fact. That is near sparkling. If you look at, say, a Pepsi or a Coke, those are carbonated to anywhere between 3 to 4 volumes of CO2. So the fact that American Light Lager is supposed to be right at 2.9 volumes puts it almost in that, spritzy soda sort of realm, which I love.
Yeah, no, and this is a very important reason to use adjuncts like corn and or rice, because if you carbonate this thing close to 3 volumes of CO2 and you've got good head development, that thing's going to be all foam.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, I personally like to even push it up to, 3 volumes of CO2. These things should be bordering on, if not on the same realm as sparkling water.
Yeah, I agree. And it's supposed to have that same refreshing character. When you think about a good example, of an American Light Lager, Miller Lite, it should be crisp, clear, not really much going on. Everything gets out of the way. It's just supposed to be a refreshing way to catch a buzz. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. So notable commercial examples, we've already talked about all of them, so I'm not going to mention any more. Look, it's obvious. I think every listener out there who's listened to more than one episode of the Brewlosophy podcast knows how much I love Miller Lite, but you better believe that in a pinch, I'll drink some Coors Light, I'll drink some Bud Light, I'll drink some other off-name light lager. That's fine with me. To me, they're just perfect for doing yard work, sitting around the pool with friends, playing Call of Duty with my brother, watching football by myself, camping with my family. I always love drinking a Miller Lite. I always have it on hand. I've made a handful of batches of American Light Lager myself using more or less traditional methods. Well, a few years ago, we had tasters evaluate an American Light Lager brewed using short and shoddy methods. Those results when we're back from this break. Are you tired of wasting beer by taking gravity measurements with too much sample volume? We've all been there. Well, the Easy Dens and Smart Ref combo by Anton Parr is your perfect solution. These smart tools provide precise wort and alcohol content measurements and track fermentation with minimal sample volume. Easily connect to your smartphone and log data in real time through the Brewmeister app. Visit EasyDens.com today and use code BRU15 for 15% off. That's Brew15 to get 15% off your order.
Imagine relying on a dozen different software programs to run your business, none of which are connected, and each one more expensive and more complicated than the last. It can be pretty stressful. Now, imagine Odoo. Odoo has all the programs you'll ever need, and they're all connected on one platform. Doesn't Odoo sound amazing? Let Odoo harmonize your business with simple, efficient software that can handle everything for a fraction of the price. Sign up today at odoo.com. That's ODOO.com.
After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer, and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. I don't know if I've mentioned before that when I went into North Corner Brewing Supply in Bellingham, Washington, all the way back in 2003 to buy my first homebrewing kit, when asked what kind of beer I wanted to brew first, I told the dude helping me out, something like Coors Light, because that's what I was drinking at the time, quite a bit of. Of course, he laughed at me and convinced me to try an Irish Red Ale instead, explaining how difficult lagers were to make. It took me over 10 years from that point to muster up the courage to brew a Miller Lite clone. And when I did, I made sure to do everything as by the book as possible. I did not want to screw this batch up. Well, contributor Jason Cipriani disregarded convention when he brewed an American Light Lager a few years back. I believe this was 2017, so it's been a bit. But for this batch, he did a full volume 5 gallon or 19 liter brew in a bag batch, and it was the style of brew in a bag where he still used a mash tun that was lined with a BIAB IBB bag, and then he loudered out of that into a kettle. So not your traditional brew in a bag, just the way his setup worked at the time. Now, for preparation, he collected the full volume of water the night before brew day, a very easy way to, shave a little bit of time off your actual brew day. And he tossed some Campton in there just to knock out any chlorine or chloramines. Again, this is not short and shoddy. Some people get this weird idea that we're trying to make bad beer. Our idea is to make the best beer possible using methods that we've tested out that don't seem to have that huge of an impact. So that's why he did that. He didn't want to have, a chlorophenolic beer. That would be gross. And he made no mineral adjustments to this beer. Oftentimes I'll like pour a little bit of gypsum or calcium chloride into my hand based on what I know my water is and my experience. He didn't do anything. What are your thoughts on that, Alex? By not adjusting the water, is there, and I don't know what his water profile is there in Colorado where he lives in Pueblo, but it would seem to me that it's probably going to be fine.
Yeah. What I was going to say, is I cannot say that I would ever do anything like this where I live, but maybe Jason's water isn't, 300 ppm of hardness. So I guess if I were him, I would certainly stick to RO or distilled water if I was going to keep it clean with no mineral adjustments. I know that where I live, the water that I have, if I brew with it straight with no adjustments, it actually produces really good beer for me because it's very soft. I think when we're getting water from our normal water source, I've talked about how we have to flip to a different station once a year for when they're fixing up ours. But when I'm getting my normal water, it is, I believe, between 36 and 45 ppm of total hardness. And it's awesome. And so it's Pilsen-like. And so it would work really well for this. It may very well be that that's what Jason was getting, and that's why he opted to go that route. But either way, he didn't use any brewing salts. He didn't add any to his water. On brew day, so the following morning, he started at 9 a.m. And he went with a grain bill of 70% pale 2-row malt, 20% flaked rice, and 20% flaked corn. I like that rather than picking one or the other, he just added both to equal 40% of the... that doesn't make sense. 70 plus 20 plus 20 does not make sense, right? It looks like 10% flaked maize, but yeah.
Yeah, that's what it was. My typo. 70% pale 2-row malt, 20% flaked rice, and 10% flaked corn. So...
Yeah, no complaints from me there. People seem to have split preferences on whether they prefer rice or maize beers. And this seems like a simple, fantastic way to appeal to both of those crowds.
Exactly. And by doing that, in my opinion, the blend is going to reduce the flavor impact of either one of those on their own. In my experience, I've used quite a bit of rice and corn in my brewing because I like these styles of beer. Rice doesn't seem to contribute much flavor at all, whereas, again, the right type of rice I've used, whereas flaked maize, you get that cream ale flavor, that it's a slightly corny, kind of more robust nuttiness, and that's my preference, so I will often just stick with flaked maize, but rice is wonderful. It works just as well. So when the water was to strike temperature, the grains were added and stirred to incorporate before he checked to ensure it was at his target mash temperature of 151 Fahrenheit or 67 C. He was aiming for 148 Fahrenheit, but what he noted in the article at least was that within like 3 or 4 minutes, he checked the mash again and it was down to closer to 148, 149. And the thing is, it's not like he was going to leave it there for very long anyways. He left that mash alone for just 20 minutes. So 40 minutes less than what your typical, brew day would look like, just 20 minutes. And then he transferred that sweet wort to a kettle and proceeded from there. But 20-minute mash, what would you expect from a 20-minute mash?
Man. Yeah, that makes, I've never done this kind of 20-minute short and shoddy type brew day. And that sort of thing makes me nervous. I'd worry about being a little bit starchy, maybe could have a little bit of a haze problem. And certainly I'd be worried about efficiency. This style already has such a low original gravity that I'd worry, I'd get even under that.
Yeah, I've done a 20-minute mash. It was actually the very first short and shoddy I brewed before we even called it that. And yeah, like you, my concern, I wanted to see what would happen. So I was okay with that. But like you, I'd be a little bit concerned about, is this the conversion gonna be real bad, because it's 40 minutes lower than what you would expect. And we'll get to that here in a minute. So when the mash was done, again, he racked that sweet wort to a kettle and then proceeded to boil it, adding 57 grams of Hersbrucker hops at first wort hop. Now, typically, a first wort hop would be in there for a little over an hour if you're boiling for an hour. In this case, he only boiled the wort for 20 minutes. So that wort was, mingling with that wort, with those hops for 20 minutes plus maybe the 10 minutes it took to bring it up to a boil. So no longer than, half an hour. And that's why he had to use such a high amount of those Hersbrucker, because isomerization is, at least according to our understanding, is a function of time in the boiling wort. And so in order to get the bitterness that he was aiming for to balance that malt sweetness, he had to use about 2 ounces of Hersbrucker, 57 grams. So to me, that works out. And hopefully, one of the, for better or for worse, one of the things that could happen with using that much hops in a 20-minute boil is that you will get some flavor and aroma carry through.
Yeah, and Hersbrucker is a German variety. That's a little knock against it too, but I don't mind too much. It's a pretty hot contender for my favorite hop. Period. I mean,
it's great.
That hay, a little bit of lemon, whisper of tobacco. I mean, great stuff. But yeah, I would worry using 2 ounces of it when 20 minutes in the boil that maybe a little too much of that would come through in this delicate beer.
Exactly. And that would, oddly enough, throw it out of style. So so when the boil was complete, Jason quickly chilled the wort using a plate chiller upon transfer to a fermentation vessel. And then he took a refractometer reading that showed the wort was at 1034 OG. That's a wonderful starting OG. And obviously, he accounted for the hit to his brewhouse efficiency, or the expected hit to his brewhouse efficiency. It was only 53%. Now, mind you, in my experience, the lower OG beers that I make, even when I'm doing short and shoddy, will have a higher brewhouse efficiency than, say, an IPA or anything bigger than that. And it's fairly linear, actually, at least in my experience. The fact that you only got 53% efficiency, despite it being, very low malt, total volume of, or amount of malt used, I think that's kind of interesting, but I'm glad he hit that 1034 at least.
Yeah, I had the exact same thought. I'm quite surprised that there was an efficiency hit, even with such because he did brew in a bag, right? Full volume mash, and
kinda, yeah. Okay. I think we shouldn't call it brew in a bag, because he did basically a batch sparge, except he didn't. It was no sparge, 2-vessel no sparge is what it was, and he used the brew in a bag more as a mash filter than as what it's originally intended for, which is to remove the bag and squeeze it. He didn't do that, so I don't know what that accounts for. But everybody's system's different. I don't know what his average brewhouse efficiency was on a standard brew day, so it may be that this is actually what he was expecting. But 1034 again lines up, so that works for us. When the boil was done, he stole 600 milliliters of remnant wort, so just stuff that was left over in his kettle, and he pitched in a vial of WLP 840 American lager yeast. So in this, he was making a vitality starter, which I think is really cool, right? Lagers often get talked about as needing this big pitch of yeast to ensure that fermentation takes off, especially if you're cold fermenting it. Vitality starter is a good way to get that yeast ready to kick ass in that wort. So he did that and left it alone for 4 hours before pitching. We're not going to include that 4 hours in the total time. The end time of this brew day was 10:45 a.m. for a total time of just 1 hour and 45 minutes. Now, one of the things we didn't mention with that low brewhouse efficiency is the fact that he only mashed for 20 minutes. And I've done the thing where I've taken hydrometer readings or refractometer readings throughout the mash step at 5-minute increments. And there is a steep from 0 to 30 minutes, it's just going up and up and up. And then right around 30 minutes is where it levels off. And then over those next 30 minutes, it might eke out a couple more points. But I wonder if he had mashed for a half an hour as opposed to 20 minutes, he probably would have gotten closer to 60% efficiency is my guess.
Yeah, and I know that some people have efficiency woes when they deal with flaked maize and flaked rice. It's possible that those grains require a little bit more time than barley does to eke out those sugars.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that myself, though at 30 minutes. The reason we settled on 30 minutes now for the short and shoddy thing is because of this data that we've been able to gather on conversions. So again, this was WLP 840, the American Lager strain, which again is purported to be sourced from Budweiser. White Labs for this yeast gives a range of 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 to 13 C. Well, Jason fermented it at 66 degrees Fahrenheit, 19 C, which is what you would typically associate with an ale, something fermented with, say, Chico or the common ale yeast. So he's going quite a bit warmer than recommendations. You might expect crazy esters to come from this or some other off flavor. Just throwing all of that to the wind.
We probably just shouldn't read any further. I think this beer is ruined.
It's so bad.
That's it.
Yeah, he clearly didn't care enough and, likes to drink bad beer. But I believe this was his first short and shoddy as well. So this was all kind of like an experiment for Jason, which I think is fun. After 7 days of fermentation, there were no signs of activity left. So he took a hydrometer measurement showing that the beer was at 1006 FG for a beautiful ABV of 3.7%. What do you think about that?
That is just absolutely perfect. No notes.
And you especially are a lover of session beers, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, most of the beers I make are under 4% ABV, so this is just right up my alley.
Yeah, we should do an experience episode on approaches that you take to making session beers, because I know that you'll make typical styles that are just lower ABV, but still your aim is to have all of that character that is associated with those other bigger beers. So, but that is for another time. At this point, Jason proceeded to cold crash to 34 degrees Fahrenheit or 1C overnight, at which point he fined it with gelatin and then transferred it to a keg that was placed in his keezer and burst carbonated at 50 PSI for 18 hours before reducing the gas to serving pressure. He then left this beer to, if you want to call it lager or condition, whatever, for a whopping 4 days. So 14 total since being brewed, at which point he served it to tasters. So this is an American light lager that was brewed 2 weeks prior to his serving it to blind tasters. Do you have any ideas as to how it might have turned out based on his brewing approach?
Yeah, that's quite a quick turnaround, and burst carb at 50 PSI, by the way, is just totally nuts. But yeah, I brewed a West Coast Pilsner a couple years ago that was grained to glass in less than a week. I served this beer at an awards ceremony, and everybody in the dining hall, a few minutes after I opened up the tap, started gagging from a buttery gym sock aroma that filled the whole hall. Thankfully, this incident happened several days before I joined Brewlosophy, so I don't think I tarnished the name of this fine company. But yeah, I hope that this quick turnaround didn't turn anything like that West Coast Pilsner.
But based on the approach that he took, a traditionalist would look and say, well, boiled it for 20 minutes, it's going to be a DMS bomb. You didn't really mind your fermentation. Now, obviously, when you warm ferment, the chances of diacetyl are going to be lower. So I don't know if there was an expectation for that. But there, bound to be all of these issues. He didn't mess around with his water. He didn't, there's a lot of stuff going on here. So now I do want to say that I'm looking at a photo of it right now, and this beer, and it's gorgeous. Very, very pale straw color, crystal clear, with a seemingly thick, creamy white cap of sticky foam on top of it.
Yeah, sticky white foam. If I'm judging this beer, I might have to knock off a few points.
It looks too good. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I'd worry about that thing foaming over in an old, dusty red Solo cup.
Why's it got to be dusty, Alex?
I don't know. They're sitting around all night. You're in a dusty room.
Yeah, I would say sticky because, with this style of beer, I could see like myself going back to the same Solo cup I used the night prior and just filling it again. So, but I will say that this beer is, for 14 days old, it is bright. I mean, it's so clear, and got to hand it to gelatin. I mean, powdered time, as we refer to it. It's amazing. So Jason, did write his personal impressions that he perceived minimal hops, The malt was subtle. The mouthfeel was thin. It perfectly aligned with the BJCP guidelines on those notes. He said that he did get a touch of apple in the aroma that reminded him of certain commercial light lagers. Let's just call it out, Bud Light. But that it wasn't offensive in any way. And I'm going to quote one of the lines that he put, that it was one of the most flavorful, flavorless beers he's had in a long time, and he highly enjoyed it. I mean, already this is not taster data. This is just the guy who brewed it, but he was not disappointed.
Oh man, I'm so glad that we're recording this in the early afternoon, because the very second that we get off this call, I'm cracking something open.
Oh, me too. I mean, it's a Sunday and there's football on. You better believe I'm going to be cracking open some Miller Lights. Are you going to be influenced by the blind taster results? Well, let's see about that. Again, this was back in 2017 where we were kind of still building the Short and Shoddy series. And so he only served this to 13 tasters. And this was done before we started telling tasters what the style was and providing them with the BJCP description to give them some sort of thing to anchor their evaluation to. So instead, tasters were completely blind. And the first thing that we asked them, God, what a terrible idea this was looking back. But the first thing we asked them was just to try to randomly guess what the style is of beer that they're drinking. So 3 people each actually marked down American Light Lager and American Lager. So that was 6 of the 13 tasters in total. That's pretty impressive if you ask me, though. Of all styles, I mean, like maybe stout would be one that would, be easier, but American Light Lager and American Lager is pretty easy, pretty much, low flavor, easy drinking, refreshing. And that's probably what I'm going to pick.
Yeah. I mean, impressive nonetheless that these people were having to pick out this, pale beer from a giant list of 200 styles to pick from. No, that's good stuff. Yeah.
Well, and then another 2 each put cream ale, which I thought was cool. 2 put pale ale, which I don't know how the hell they got to that. And 2 put fruit beer. I have a feeling that's probably because of that little hint of apple. And when you're evaluating and analyzing a beer that you have no clue about how it was made or what style it is, it can be really easy to focus on the first thing you perceive and have that kind of overwhelm your kind of mental thinking about that beer. One person also put malt liquor, which I think is interesting because I've at 3 and some change percent ABV. Malt liquor to me has a very notable, alcohol bite to it. And I can't imagine this beer did, but hey, I would almost clump that in with the American Light Lager and American Lager folks as well.
Yeah, that's almost hilariously on point that they guessed malt liquor with a style that has a similar reputation as American Light Lager.
That's true. God. So in terms of how hoppy, malty, and dry the beer was, tasters rated the strongest characteristic as being its dryness, which yielded an average of about 3.6 out of 5. I would have expected it to be higher, but tasters then rated the maltiness as a 1.5, while the hoppiness scored a 1.2 out of 5. That all adds up to me. I mean, you're not supposed to have much malt flavor, much hop flavor, and it's supposed to be very dry. So,
yeah, with something like this, it's really difficult to pick out. Is this maltiness? Is this hoppiness? When it's such a blank canvas to begin with. Those are pretty good ratios for me.
Yeah, exactly. Now to break things down a little bit more in terms of hop character, 5 of the 13 tasters rated melon as being the most notable hop character. I think that's interesting. 4 people put fruity, 2 people marked earthy, and 1 each rated pine resinous and floral. Nobody said it was spicy, berry, dank caddy, or onion garlic. I don't, in beers where there's really, essentially no hop character, I can see why melon would be one that you would go to. I usually go with something like earthy because that's how I perceive it, but it may very well be that the higher amount of the Hersbrucker used for that 20-minute boil did, contribute a little bit of a melon character, I guess.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. With such delicate beers like this, it's just so hard to pin down exact flavors. Someone could have, cut a watermelon a mile away, and it would have tainted this process.
That's exactly right. So same goes for malt character. In this case, though, I feel like people were a little bit more spot on. 6 out of the 13, so a plurality, said that the cracker bread crust was the most prominent malt character. 4 people marked caramel sweet, which I think is interesting, and then 3 people endorsed nutty. Nobody rated toasty, chocolate, or roast, which makes perfect sense. Again, I didn't try this beer, but in my conversations with Jason, he said that he would have put cracker bread crust as well.
Yeah, there seems to be a little bit of a meme with a short and shoddy that at least one person will endorse a roasty character. So the fact that this actually came out at 0 people endorsing a toasty, roasty character tells me that this was, an incredibly clean, crackery beer.
Success, exactly. So for yeast character, 4 out of the 13 people endorsed clean. 4 more said esters, and 4 more said sulfur, with 1 taster rating wild, which is wild to me. But nobody endorsed phenolics. But 4 each for clean, esters, and sulfur. The clean and the sulfur makes sense to me. The fact that 4 people put esters, which we put a description on there as like fruitiness, right? Would kind of make sense if there indeed was that appley, that whisper of apple in the finish from the fermentation. So I guess that kind of adds up.
Yeah, same thoughts. Equal split between clean, esters, sulfur makes sense. Striking that balance between kind of flavorless apple, little whisper of sulfur. Yeah, that's a delicate dance. And seems like that's how this beer turned out.
Yeah, when it comes to certain lager styles, a little bit of sulfur is something I think can be actually quite delightful. But that's more for like European lagers, not an American light lager. So that may very well have been a function of the fact that this beer was served in 14 days from when it was brewed, and that a little bit more time, in the fermentation vessel or just age. Sulfur is actually quite easy to get rid of, by the way. You can kind of agitate your keg, pull your the PRV, agitate it again, pull the PRV until you don't smell it anymore, and it will just go away. It's pretty cool. So that's not something I'd worry too much about, though. I often question just if these things were actually there, because they are, we're asking for tasters' subjective opinions. So in terms of off flavors, out of the 13 tasters who took this survey, 5 of them did note off flavors. 3 put astringency. 1 endorsed acetaldehyde. That's likely that little green apple thing is my guess. And 1 person said diacetyl. In my opinion, if there was diacetyl in this beer, I would have expected more people to notice it. So that one I find questionable. But 3 people saying it was astringent. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe that astringency could be carbonic bite being interpreted as kind of a puckering feeling.
That was exactly my thought as well. And when I so we make sparkling water at my house and keep it on tap at all times. And we very intentionally overcarbonate it. But in doing that, you'll sip it and you get kind of this fuzzy thing on your tongue, and that is a quality of astringency. And so it may very well just have been the carbonation in general, that was causing that perception. So who knows? But still, only 5 out of 13 people noting them, and then having there be some disagreement on what the off flavor was. I think that just goes to show that this beer wasn't terrible at the very least. So now my 2 favorite questions that we ask on the short and shoddy survey are, how well does this version that you're drinking now represent the style based on the BJCP description? So this is where we would usually share on this old survey with the tasters the BJCP description, and then let them rank the beer on a scale of 0 to 5, how close what they're drinking matches what they're reading, right, in the BJCP. 1 person gave it a 5 out of 5. 6 people rated it a 4 out of 5. 2 people rated it a 3 out of 5. 3 people thought it was a 2 out of 5. 0 gave it a 1 out of 5, but 1 person gave it the big old goose egg.
I'm hoping that the taster that gave it a 0 out of 5 is actually a light lager snob. It's like, this is outrageous. This clearly tastes like an American lager, not a light lager.
That's right, yeah. Oh, did you get this from the toilet at a baseball game? Is that what, that's I suspect that's probably it. If not, I kind of hope that person who gave it a 0 out of 5 is also the one who tasted diacetyl, because that would actually make sense, right? But that's neither here nor there. To me, I mean, when you've got 7, so a majority of people rating it a 4 or 5 out of 5, again, this beer, if we're going to base it on, ratings, seems to be a fairly good representation of the style, despite the blasphemous way it was brewed. The follow-up question to that is, how much did you like this beer? And it's the same rating. So one person rated it a 5 out of 5. They liked this beer enough to think that, it was excellent and they wanted to drink more of it. 3 other people gave it a 4 out of 5. 6 people gave it a 3 out of 5. So right there, you've got 10 out of the 13 people with a 3 or higher rating in terms of their preference. Nobody rated it a 2 out of 5. And then here we go, Alex. 3 people gave it a 1 out of 5. Nobody gave it a 0 on this. So despite thinking it was a shitty representation of the style, that person still was like, well, I kind of like it though. So who knows how much, but I don't know. What do you think of those preference ratings?
Yeah, as someone who brews a decent amount of light lagers, I'm not surprised in the slightest that the preference rating was low, even though the representation of style leaned pretty good. I think we have to also mention that this was in the mid-2010s when the light lager hate train was arguably at its peak, I think myself included. Since I didn't even touch the stuff until pretty recently.
Yeah, I've never hated it. I went through a very brief phase, probably in 2004, 2005, where I was like, oh man, I did the snobby thing. And then I spent time with people who don't brew beer and realized how snobby I looked and how much I actually do enjoy light lager. So I've been off that train for a while, but I agree with you. I think some of these ratings are influenced by the fact that, it's an American light lager and people love to hate it. So there you have it. To me, this seemed like a pretty decent example of American light lager. And Jason seemed to think so as well. And I think that's pretty awesome. So we've got some reader comments to get to before we wrap things up. Mike said, I love the fact you challenge conventional brew wisdom and often find pretty delicious results. Beer can be forgiving at times, yet also perplexing when you get an unexpected result. Thank you for showing that all grain lagers don't necessarily take 2 months to brew.
Yeah, we'll probably say it a million times, but that's one of the greatest things about the Short and Shoddy series is if there's something you want to brew, but you're a little daunted by, cold fermentations or not having enough time, I mean, just go for it. It'll probably be great.
And at the very least, you're going to learn something. I mean, that to me is what Brewlosophy stands for, is we'll do the weird stuff that other people don't want to do, in part to show that it can be done, to show what you can't get away with as well. I mean, that's what inspired the Experiment series. I think it's pretty cool too, Mike. Next comment comes from Jim Fisher, who says, way cool. However, I am a bit concerned over your immortal soul, as this process is clearly blasphemous.
Well, no comment.
If only you could see the other parts of my life, Jim. There's a lot of blasphemy
Right.
going on in this heathen soul over here. So
yeah, it's not just Short and Shoddy. That's the problem.
That's so true, man. I'm evil is what it is, right? Nope, I'm still kicking and enjoying life, and I'm happy despite not having weird beliefs and such. So here we go. Ray with 2 Y's says, this is the last comment that we got, says, tasters felt the beer had, quote, a touch of apple and sulfur. Yeah, that's the consensus on that yeast variety, and they protect it like it's the family jewels. So just a note, again, Jason used White Labs WLP 840 American Lager, which we're pretty certain is sourced from Budweiser. And it is known to have this kind of light appley flavor. And the sulfur, this was fermented at 66 degrees Fahrenheit. And I've made beers that have sulfur, a sulfur note fermented warm, don't get me wrong, but I don't see how that was from that yeast, but apparently, according to Ray at least, that's a normal thing for this yeast. So yeah, maybe that explains it.
Yeah, and just like every other beer style, this is a good example of how your yeast choice is arguably the most important decision you make when making a beer. So if you love something like Bud Light, maybe check out this yeast. If you don't, maybe avoid it.
Exactly. And if you love something like Coors Light, I would encourage you to try using something like L13 Global, which is the Weihenstephan strain. If you love something like Miller Lite, I would say you're going to get a little bit closer to that characteristic Miller Lite flavor if you use something like L17 or the Augustiner strain. There's so much fun to be had making this style of beer that people love to hate. And plus, you can be the weirdo who is actually honest and and doesn't hate it just for the sake of hating it. So that is all the time that we've got for American Light Lager. Alex, first question is, how many Miller Lights are you going to drink today, or whatever your American Light Lager of choice is? So where are you at with that?
Yeah, well, perhaps unsurprisingly, the results of my blind tasting last night made a Miller Lite make the top of the list.
Yeah, so, buddy.
The plan was to have one Miller Lite after this recording, but talking up this short and shoddy beer here, we might have to make it 4.
Yeah, there you go. 4, or that's a fuzzy 4, as I say to my wife. It's a fuzzy 4. I think I had that many, but I've got Tim's coming over to watch some football with me. I've still got some Celebration ales, so we're going to go back and forth between that and Miller Lite. But excellent style, and again, highly encourage anybody who enjoys drinking refreshing pale light lagers, give this short and shoddy approach a shot, and it may very well work out for you. All right, remember to subscribe to the Brew Lab podcast, where host Cade Job takes you into the lab with brewing experts, so you're notified when new episodes drop. And don't forget, you can click the link in the description of this episode to read all about this short and shoddy American Light Lager. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more. Life is good, the likelihood of me.
Hi, I'm Chris Gethard, and I'm very excited to tell you about Beautiful Anonymous, a podcast where I talk to random people on the phone. I tweet out a phone number, thousands of people try to call. You talk to one of them, they stay anonymous, I can't hang up, that's all the rules. I never know what's going to happen. We get serious ones. I've talked with meth dealers on their way to prison. I've talked to people who survived mass shootings. Crazy funny ones. I talked to a guy with a goose laugh, somebody who dresses up as a pirate on the weekends. I never know what's going to happen. It's a great show. Subscribe today, Beautiful Anonymous.